Good morning, Mr. Ray.
Morning, Mitch. How's it going on, man?
It's going pretty good, man. Going pretty good. It looks like you and I are about probably the only people up on the face of the earth right now.
it
It's
sure,
dark in
it
my
sure seems
background.
like
It's dark in your background, man. I think we beat the Baptist men's breakfast this morning.
Today we beat the Baptists for sure.
For sure, man. Oh man, it's good to see you, brother. Seems like it's been a little bit of a while, and man, we had a really great time with Zeus, and had an opportunity to hear from him, and as we got into the portions of Matthew that he shared with you and I today, we are going to, I think, hit some of the most important pieces of the puzzle here, Ray. I think some of the conversations I've had with some of the people that I associate with and have relationships with, they're really enjoying this, but they're also beginning to get really challenged. And as they get more and more challenged, the questions continue to go deeper. And but the problem is the questions, they're going to get two sets of answers. They're going to get the set of answers that they might get if they attend the church, or they're going to get a set of answers that they get when they watch us or listen to us. But there's also that knowledge of actually reading even an English translated version of the Bible. And as we move in, Ray, to chapter 5, verse 17 today, these are actually the verses that shot up the red flags to me big time as I was growing as a Christian, man. And
Right.
because I don't know about you, when I can remember back when I first started following Jesus and was in the church, I was told to read the book of John. Okay, read the book of John and then read the book of Acts. Well, I was never told to read the gospel of Matthew and learn about Jesus that way, but it was right straight to John. And of course, when you get to John, and we'll talk about this one day, just about the type of writing that the book of John is, and how there's so many different layers of vision that's going on in the book of John. But you're sort of reading about Jesus, you know, already doing what he does, and not so much the historical piece of his life. And then as you get into his relationship with the disciples, and on into the planting of the gatherings as the disciples leave out, and then you start getting into Paul's teachings.
Right.
As I went back into and started really reading the Gospels, well, of course, when you get into the Sermon on the Mount, and you get to chapter 5, and of course, these next couple verses are straight up, they're life changing. And I mentioned earlier this week that in chapter 5, verse 17, that we'll start with today, there's one word that Christian theology shifts everything off of, and they use that as the foundational piece for the Jesus that they talk about. And we'll talk about that word as we get into it.
Right.
But if you're okay, I'll go ahead and open us up with verse 17 out of chapter 5. You good with that?
Yep.
All right, bro. Well, here we go. It says, do not imagine that I have come to nullify the Torah or the words of the prophets. I have not come to nullify, but to make full. Now, I read this particular version because it replaces the word fulfill with nullify. And there's been a lot of discussions about that. And of course, even if you take the Christian theology viewpoint of the word fulfilled that you find in most English translations, you're being taught that Jesus fulfilled the Torah, and so therefore there's no need. That's how we end up with what they call the Old Testament, and then the New Testament. The old is done away with, the new comes into play, It's all hinged on that.
Exactly.
But Ray, Jesus clearly, he says here, do not imagine. And who is he talking to? I mean, he's talking to his disciples, correct? And so it says, do not imagine that I have come to nullify the Torah or the words of the prophets, but I have not come to nullify, but to make full. And the disciples understood his terminology. They understood that discussion that was going on there. And
because of the circle of their conversation. I mean, us reading the Gospels or reading the New Testament in general, reading the Bible in general, have to understand that there's a historical setting here. There's a historical context.
Yes.
If we are outside of that context, we're going to bring in our life, our context,
yes,
and whatever we may think that those words mean. If we're not educated in the Bible itself and that thought process, that context, that religious context, if we lose that, we don't really ascertain and we don't grab the message. We won't be able to grab the message.
Yes. Well, and the difficult piece too, Ray, is as you look at this, specifically 17, where I'm just going to read this little piece here that the guest that we had last week, Zeus, he wrote this commentary on Matthew, and this piece right here just really, really, there's a lot that goes behind it, but he says the Christian version of Yeshua, aka Jesus, has done everything that the historical Jesus told us not to do. I mean, that's powerful. And it says he changed the Torah for something else, which is where we get the old and then the new. And then they also caused the rejection of the Jewish people, which is absolutely crucial when it comes to understanding the book that they wrote.
Exactly.
And so and there's extensive studies of Greek and then the Aramaic and Hebrew specifically on the word fulfilled. And we know, you and I have done this study before, and we've looked at it from different perspectives, and we understand that Jesus would not say one thing in part of his sentence and then come right back to, because he forbids his disciples for even thinking that he came to abolish the Torah. And it says here in Torah Club, it goes, how much more so should we be forbidden to teach the abolishment of the Torah as a theological pillar or doctrine? The Torah of God's unchanging revelation and standards of law until the end of time, until heaven and earth have passed away. Of course, this is out of Luke 16:7. It is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of letter of the law to fall. Well, Ray, what does that mean to someone that's growing up that's not Jewish, or that's growing into a theology that's not Jewish? When you're telling me that Jesus is saying that we should not do away with that, are you telling me then that I've got to obey or I've got to make an attempt to hold on to the laws? Because this is where preachers and teachers get up in front of their congregations and they tell them. And what I hate about it is they'll do it a lot of times with a smirk on their face. Do away with that law. You got grace, okay? But how can they do that, Ray, when Jesus is specifically saying this? And if a Christian wants to be a disciple of Jesus, are you saying now that we've got to turn around and follow those laws completely,
Right.
Sorry about that.
Mitch, I mean, we're fighting a very difficult battle here. It's a battle that didn't start just yesterday. I mean, this is coming down with 2,000 years of force and of strength. And you could just picture a snowball going downhill, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is sort of what we're tackling here. Anything that we say, it's going to be something that we battle with, almost 2,000 years plus of strength, theological strength of Christianity against these types of interpretation. Because I don't know if it was done knowingly or not, but That's exactly what they've done. I mean, they've turned the teachings of Jesus on their head. I mean, they've done exactly what he said not to do. You read
Exactly.
you read the verses within their own context. That's exactly what he says. We have to understand, what was Jesus, what did he believe was the divine scripture, and what was his breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was the what we know as what Christians will call the Old Testament, or the only Testament, is what he considered divine scripture. We have to continue to say this and reiterate it, that Jesus nor the disciples who wrote what we know as the New Testament writings, they didn't have such a thing.
Right.
That did not exist. So when he said certain things about the scriptures, he only meant the Hebrew Bible. He only meant that.
Mm-hmm.
That may touch a nerve with many Christians and traditional Christians, but it doesn't matter. This is the historical reality. We can either confront the historical reality or continue to bury our heads in a theological sand,
Man.
so to say.
Yeah.
And for Jesus, okay, his teachings, when he taught, right, everything that he taught in the Gospels that we know, that we have of him historically, this is his interpretive method as a rabbi, explaining what's in the Torah, what's in the Bible. This is him explaining these things,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And so inside of these teachings, you have a lot of ethics, you have a lot of teachings that get the people, to turn back to God, admonishments, etc. This is what they're at. I wanted to read something that I have about his teachings, about Jesus' teachings.
Yes.
Okay, our holy teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, he strives to admonish his disciples here in these verses of Matthew 5:17-20. He admonishes his disciples in the discipline called Musar ethics, and in strengthening the validity of the Torah. So we may ask, what is Musar? Musar is a Jewish path of spiritual growth and character development.
Yes.
Musar aims to help us live up to the high standards that the Torah tradition sets for human behavior. It aims, simply put, to help us become more holy and thus more whole, sanctified, not merely for our own sakes, but to fulfill our purpose in improving the world. The building blocks of this approach are the midot, or character traits identified by the rabbis. Musar is also seen as rebuke given by a person of authority to a subordinate. Musar may be carried out through corporal punishment or simply a verbal tongue lashing, of which we see the prophets do throughout the entire Bible.
Yes.
Jesus follows this line of tradition, very much like Jeremiah or Isaiah. It also focuses on inculcating proper behavior for the future. This is what Musar does. This is what you see Jesus engaged in with his disciples a lot, turning them back towards God, into the Word, internalizing the Torah. The moment you internalizing Torah, it shows up as your good deeds. He would teach about all these things. All right. There's a very great Orthodox rabbi known in the Jewish world as the Yavitz, which that acronym means Rabbi Jacob Emden. He was actually very fond of the historical Jesus of Nazareth. He wrote treatises. He wrote a little book on Jesus and his teachings and the teachings of the disciples, but not from a Christian lens. Okay, not from a traditional Christian lens, but reading the Gospels and seeing Jesus in his historical landscape, context, and religious culture. Right?
Yeah, man.
He had this to say about the Nazarene. He says, first, let me read the beginning part of this. You can find this in the Desolate Gospels.
Yeah.
It says, when emerging Christianity lost its Jewish moorings, the Christians lost the interpretive tools to understand the Gospels correctly. Rabbi Jacob Emden, who lived from the years 1697 to 1776, explains that the Gentile world did not fully understand the intent of the authors of the Gospels. For example, some Christian theologians teach the cessation of Torah, as we're talking about here, right? And Matthew 5:17, you were just talking about it. I've sat in many pews and heard the pastor say this, and I would wonder, where is he getting this from? But he would say, Jesus came to literally nullify the Torah, because he fulfilled it. It's no longer, you don't longer have to do it. What is sufficient is that you accept Jesus into your life, okay? And what that means, that translate is to accept Jesus into your life means accept this particular church's theological construct. Believe A, B, C, you get it. You get a ticket to get in.
Yes.
Pretty much so. I've summed it up. I know what it means. You know what it means. And there's no getting around that.
Yes.
Because no matter how many good deeds a Christian may say he does, or say the church does, and it's true, they're full of good deeds. But at the end of the day, they will tell you, hey, none of those good deeds mean anything. You didn't do anything, because those those deeds are like filthy rags.
Right.
They mean nothing.
Right.
They mean anything. They don't mean anything at all. Because if you don't have Jesus, you're not getting in. If you don't accept him in your heart, that theological, whatever that means theologically to them, you're not getting in. All right. In contrast to this, Rabbi Emden says, the Yavitz, he says, and I quote, "Learn and accept the truth from whoever says it." That's beautiful, because in Jewish tradition, according to the Jewish people, truth doesn't belong to any individual enterprise. It is the signature of God. Right. And so we must follow truth wherever it leads, right? So he says, learn and accept the truth from whoever says it. For it is thus plainly apparent that the Nazarene and his apostles did not come to nullify the Torah from Israel. He says, God forbid, very much like Paul says in his writings.
Yes.
He says, God forbid. For it is written in Matthew that the Nazarene said, and I quote, "Do not think that I have come to nullify the Torah. I have only come to uphold it. I say to you, even if heaven and earth were to be fulfilled, were to be nullified, in any case, not a single letter or dot from the Torah will ever be nullified, but rather upheld. Therefore, whoever nullifies even a single of the smallest mitzvot commandments and teaches others to do likewise will be called small in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever performs the commandments and teaches others to perform them will be called great." Rabbi Emden continues, it also says this in Luke. So the matter is exceedingly clear that it did not even enter the mind of the Nazarene to nullify the Torah. And you can find this in Rabbi Emden's letter called Sefer Seder Olam Rabbah Vezukta U Magalit Ta'anit. Okay? That's a mouthful right there. That's in Hebrew, but
yeah, man.
all right. But the Desolate Gospel, right after that says this. It says, in the early 2nd century, Rabbi Gamliel II made the point, while correcting a Gentile Christian misinterpretation of the gospel, and he quotes, he says it like this. He says, Rabbi Gamaliel II says, "Go down to the end of the scroll," meaning of the gospel, "where it is written, I did not come to destroy the Torah of Moses, nor to add to the Torah of Moses." You can find that in the Talmud, Shabbat 116b.
Yes.
Okay? To go further, there's another Orthodox rabbi called the Rashbats, Rabbi Shimon ben Semak of Duran. He lived in the years 1361 through 1444. He also commented, he says, as far as Yeshua's intent for the Jewish people, it did not even occur to him to change the Torah for them, nor for himself or for his disciples. After all, they were Jewish and upheld the Torah themselves. Isn't that amazing?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
dude, what do we do? I mean, as a Christian, what do you do with that level of truth, with that historical context? What do we do with that?
Let me ask you this, Ray. I get this a lot of times too. Why should we believe the rabbis?
Why? Well,
Why should I believe what you just said trumps what's being taught today? Because you hear in the church a lot, don't be listening to rabbis, because for as many rabbis as there are, there's that many interpretations.
Right.
Which in the mind of a Christian goes, it muddies the water up.
Yep.
Okay? Why is it important to listen to sages like that, Ray? I mean, I know why, but I'm asking you, bro. Why is it important as someone that's going to be I guess you'll call it a follower of Jesus? Because that goes back to the whole term, put Jesus in your heart. Well, what does that mean? To accept him as your Lord and Savior. What does that mean? But these are all concepts that come out of rabbinical teachings. Why? All of them except for the part of putting them into your heart. But why should we believe the rabbinic teachings?
I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, I think you just touched on it. And it's as simple as this. Jesus himself was called rabbi. It's found in the Gospels. I mean, they called him rabbi. Mm-hmm. The Jewish people come from the religious context, tradition, same one that Jesus was part of. Mm-hmm. We, on the other hand, Christianity, built an entirely new structure. Mm-hmm. They built an entirely new religion on the words of Jesus and left out the historicity of those words and where they're grounded in.
Exactly.
They cut themselves off from knowing the historical context. Exactly. They actually went against anything that held the traditional viewpoint context of Jewish people and their relationship with God according to the Bible. They built a new structure entirely.
Exactly.
That's how I see the historical landscape and what has happened in the last 2,000 years.
Yes, and I think for Christian teachers, pastors or preachers or whatever, I think they get some of that knowledge into them, but they can't turn that ship around. They can't turn that ship around thought-wise. But then you're going to ask them to go out in front of a couple of hundred people and then change up that whole philosophical thought process. And I think a lot of it is they don't know what to do with it, right?
Let me say this one thing. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it is very difficult for a Christian to do that, especially a leader of a congregation, right? But do not think for 1 second that for Rabbi Jacob Emden or for the Rashbats that it was easy for them to say what they said about the historical Jesus,
right?
Because you have to understand the dilemma as it comes down in the Jewish community. The Jewish people have been at the blunt of taking hits and persecution from Christianity, both spiritually and physically, okay? Throughout the centuries, inquisitions, crusades, and even culminating down to our time through the teachings of Martin Luther and etc. Up in Germany with the Nazis and the Holocaust.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah. There's many stories that you will hear when a Nazi would tell a Jew, this is because you killed God or because you killed Jesus.
Exactly, man. Exactly. That's huge. I hear that a lot too.
I mean, you beg my pardon, I'm not saying that I'm not equating a Nazi with a Christian at all. I am not. but you do have to understand that they had some type of influence. I mean, Nazi Germany, Germany at that time was predominantly Christian, okay? And there are many people who did not do a lot. And yeah, there are many Christians who did a lot of good too. And I'm not saying that Nazis were Christians, okay? But this same type of persecution, if not physically, is still going on spiritually.
Yes.
Because a Christian will tell a Jew or whoever that you're not saved because you do not accept Jesus. And we're not talking about people of a different religion. We're not talking about a Buddhist or anything like that, which is a totally different other conversation. But we're going to tell the Jewish people, the people who have brought us the revelation of God,
Yes.
that they are not saved, though they keep the will of God scrupulously, right? They keep the will of God scrupulously. Yes. They're not saved because you do not accept our take and our spin and our interpretation of a Jewish man who lived 2,000 years ago, right?
Yes.
Because you don't accept him. I mean, that's a big problem, bro. That's a big problem that there's no room for that type of problem in 2020.
No, man, it's like I'm in and you're out. And Christianity is the only, that picture is so, so embedded into the minds of people that we have got it right, everybody else has got it wrong. And like you said, it's built on A, B, and C, but those A, B, and C's can be mixed up through denominations, but you're still going to get A, B, and C at some point.
Theological assent, a theological belief system.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, let's do this. I'm gonna hit on 17, and we're gonna work our way here just a little bit. I got a couple notes here for you, brother. Where Jesus says, "I did not come," and how important that is. When the Master said, "Do not think that I came to abolish the Torah," he was not referring to his incarnation or arrival from heaven. The expression "I came to" functions idiomatically in Hebrew to express purpose or intention. He was not speaking about coming as the Messiah. He was speaking about the purpose of his teachings. He was not speaking about fulfilling messianic prophecies. Instead, he said here, Ray, "Do not think that my teaching is intended to in any way diminish the Torah. My intention is not to abolish the Torah of Moses, but to establish it."
That's beautiful.
In these words, he declared that he was teaching halakha. That is to say, he was explaining how to live out the Torah. And that's where now we get to the word fulfilled. Yeshua said that he did not come to abolish the Torah of the prophets, but to fulfill. Christianity often misunderstands these words to mean that Christ did not come to abolish the Torah, but to fulfill it, and that by fulfilling it, he thereby abolishes it. The interpretation is irrational and self-contradicting, my friend. He goes,
exactly.
What did he mean when he said that? Well, in the context, fulfilled does not mean to add to the Torah. In this context, fulfilled does not mean to add to the Torah, to replace the old Torah with a new higher law, replace the Torah with a new law of love, or even to fulfill the prophetic content of the Torah. Instead, fulfill must be understood as the opposite of abolish. And we simply read that. Even in English translations, my friend, the Greek word for fulfill is palero. And regarding its use here, Thayer explains that it means to carry into effect, to bring to realization, to realize, universally and absolutely to fulfill, to cause God's will as made known in the law, to be obeyed as it should be. Matthew uses paleo argues that Matthew's use of paleo argues that Yeshua is both obeying the Torah as it should be, and through his teachings, causing God's Torah to be obeyed as it should be.
Amen. That's beautiful.
Sages often argued about how to properly interpret the commandments, and that's what we find Jesus doing here. And if, however, the rabbis ruled that a part of a commandment was to be annulled or a part fulfilled, they are liable for misinterpretation. I mean,
Yes.
you're heretics at that point.
Yep.
A rabbi who misinterprets the Torah was said to be abolishing it.
Abolishing it. Yep.
Okay? A
Beautiful.
rabbi who properly interprets the Torah was said to be fulfilling it.
Fulfilling it.
And you
If you
should,
interpret it correctly.
yes. And you said this a while back, bro. You gave the example of like you as a husband fulfilling your duties as a husband. When you became the husband and that certificate, you know, I did a wedding here a couple weeks ago, and the gentleman I'm standing there in front of, once I signed that marriage certificate, dude, this is just the beginning of the process. And I tell him, I said, this doesn't. I mean, you're a husband. This doesn't mean you fulfilled your goal as being this husband.
You do your duties
You
at
do your
home
duties,
today.
man.
You
Yeah.
do your duties. Hey Mitch, you do your duties at home today, and then tell your wife, I fulfilled my duty yesterday. It is completely abolished for the rest of the week. What do you think is gonna happen?
And she will tell you if it's been fulfilled or not. Okay. She will let you know if your job is being fulfilled. But I think though that you at some point have to do that word study, and because Ray, most people think Jesus spoke entirely Greek,
Right.
and
Right.
and there are teachers that say like when he gives Peter his name, his Greek name, that's giving proof that he just consistently. If you say he spoke consistently in Greek, to most people's minds, that is, he thinks Greek. Okay, and you know as well as I do, there's a difference between Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and Aramaic follows more
We're
along.
Hebrew.
Yes, sir, and that's kind of
In Jesus' day, the historical languages for Jews, it was like this. They predominantly spoke Aramaic, okay? But the elite, or you would say the religious authority, could speak both Hebrew and
yes,
Aramaic,
yes,
okay? So, the Galileans, everyone spoke Aramaic. It was like the tongue of the time for the Jewish people. But even many Jews, whether in Israel or outside of Israel, could speak some Greek, at least for, in the market, whatever, they had to have dealings with non-Jews because Greek was the world language, how English is today the world language everywhere. So Greek was the same at that time. Yes. What we have preserved in the New Testament, because of the exile and because of, no one, the non-Jews couldn't really read Aramaic or Hebrew. The Gospels were kept and saved in Greek.
yes.
But even in the Greek, you could see that the style is very much Hebrew. I mean, it's Hebrew mindset, Hebraisms. You could see them in the Greek. They find them like if once you read it in the Greek, you could see scholars are able to see Hebraisms in them, right?
Yes.
Furthermore, you could read it in Greek all you want. You have to understand that in the mind and in the words when they first came out were in that type of Jewish context of Hebrew and Aramaic.
Yes. Yes.
That's very, very important to know.
Yes.
Going back to this verse, so we can move to verse 18, I have a few words that I want to share by Rabbi Elijah Steve Soloveitchik,
yes.
Orthodox Jew, Orthodox rabbi as well. He says, do not imagine, meaning, do not think that the good attributes, because what Jesus is doing here is teaching his disciples how to properly interpret and carry out the commandments of God, i.e. the will of God, i.e. the Torah, right?
Yes.
He says, do not think that the good attributes that I caution you, meaning Jesus, the one that he's cautioning his disciples, that I caution you to perform are the main principle of the Torah commandments, that the Torah commands you to do are merely secondary. He says, do not think that. Do not think that what the good attributes that I'm teaching you is primary and that carrying out the commandments is secondary. He says, do not think that. For if so, you may, God forbid, violate one of the commandments. Therefore, I caution you not to violate even one of the smallest commandments. Rabbi Soloveitchik says of Jesus' words. He says, and in my teaching you the good attributes, I thereby am supporting the Torah. So Jesus is teaching the disciples how to have these good attributes, how to understand the Torah properly, how to have good character traits in order to internalize the law of God and be able to carry it out properly.
Yeah, well put, bro.
This is what Rabbi Soloveitchik is explaining here. Yeah. He says, the main principle is good works. This is what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. He says the main principle is good works. Just as Yeshua himself said in chapter 7:21, not everyone who says to me, my master, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but rather the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. What? Not everyone who says so many words, hey, Jesus this, Jesus that. No. The one who does the will of God will enter in.
Yes.
This comes from the mouth of Jesus himself, right? He says, for the main principle is to do and to obey. For he only came in order to, he says, for he only came in order to strengthen them so that they would perform the commandments in their entirety. Imagine that. You know, it says in the Bible on the strength of witness of 2 or 3, any matter should be established.
Yes.
I mean, me and you are 2 witnesses, and we brought Rabbi Jacob Emden, the Rashbats, and now Rabbi Soloveitchik. We got, how much is that? We got 5.
Yes.
I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, that was good thinking there, bro. You pulled that together real well, man. That's so important because that leads us into verse 18. I mean, that literally leads us in, and verse 18 is nothing more.
The context. It's the context of verse 17.
Well, verse 18 drives the nail home.
Yes.
With it says, "For, amen, I say to you." This is Jesus. He says, I say to you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one yod or one coach, which is another word for a tittle, will pass away from the Torah until all has been established. A yod and a tod. A yod is the smallest letter in the Hebrew language. Okay, it's like a apostrophe.
Yes.
The coach is called a tittle. If you look at the script of Hebrew language, sometimes there are these little marks that are put on top of letters to distinguish one letter from another letter that look the same, okay? These are very small pen strokes. Jesus is saying, man, he is saying that not one yod and not one tittle will pass away from the Torah until all has been established. You know what he's doing right there, Ray? Man, he is telling you, my man, he's telling you and he's telling me, this is how important the Torah is. This is how important it is to stay connected to the Torah. This is how important it is whether you call yourself a Christian or a Messianic or what. And the Jews understand this. But this is how important it is to stay connected to the Torah and to understand it. To me, this is the nail. I mean, this is the piece that just drives home what 17 says. And you can't, as a Christian, no matter what translation you read verse 18 in, you got to look at that and you have got to internalize that here.
Yeah.
Understand the support of that and who he's talking to. And where our role comes in, because he's talking to, who is he talking to here?
The disciples, the Jewish disciples.
And where do we fit in? And how do we fit in with that?
Depends on what we call ourselves. if we call ourselves a disciple of Jesus, we have to make sure that we're following his directives. We're following his teaching.
See, and when I hear people go, all you need is Jesus. I hear that all the time. All you need is Jesus. I'm sitting there going, you need
the problem is how do you even connect to Jesus, right? He's not even he's not even here today. The apostles at least had him walking side by side, but there is a way to connect with the Rebbe as much as there is a way to connect with God. I mean, God is said to be infinite and to be invisible, right? And the Bible uh, defines him as a consuming fire, whatever that means, right? Because he doesn't have a body, he doesn't have any form, right? He's the infinite creator. But it's so beautiful. The commandments are said to be, every time you carry out the will of God, it is a way that you attach yourself to the Creator.
Amen.
At every moment that you obey a will of God, and that you treated your neighbor correctly, or that you refrained from stealing something, or that you obeyed your father and your mother, these are ways that you attach yourself to the infinite Creator. How amazing is that?
Yes,
right?
Sir. Yes, sir.
So it's in a similar fashion, a disciple can connect to his rabbi. How? By carrying out his teachings. You see, the rabbi had already internalized the Torah.
Yes.
Okay, he had studied it, he had carried it out in his life for many, many years, his whole life.
Yes.
And now he's teaching you how to correctly keep the will of God. And so when you keep the will of God is interpreted through the lens of that rabbi, you are attaching yourself to that rabbi.
Wow. You know what? And you said that, but I'm going to say this, and of course, I don't mind being called a heretic. You know, I'm going to say this, man. There are more disciples of Paul than there are of Jesus.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
There are more people that run around and go, all you need is Jesus, but what they really are disciples of a misinterpreted Paul.
What's so amazing that you bring that up, Mitch, is that it may be divine providence, and it's still got, if Jesus' words got twisted, I mean, Paul's words got twisted 20-fold, okay? Because what happens is this: Jesus in his historical lifetime never really discipled any non-Jew.
Exactly.
This is only the historical landscape and what we know, the historicity of what happened.
Right.
Because he was a Jew among Jews, and all his disciples were Jewish people. I mean, if you go to any Jewish community today, you won't see non-Jews under the tutelage of a rabbi. It doesn't really happen too much. Maybe more so our time, I think, because we're drawing closer to the redemption, but that's another topic. But the reason why Paul, most of the Gentile world finds a lot of strength in the words of Paul is because his ministry, his entire mission was not to the Jewish people at all. Yes. His entire mission and what he did, his work, was towards the non-Jews, period.
Yes. And you know what's important about that, Ray? Paul is trying to teach you and I how to attach ourselves to a tzaddik, to Jesus, okay? And it's gotten taken so out of context, man, that there is no attachment to the historical person from Nazareth because they've done away with who that person really is. And it's sad, man. It's sad. And hopefully, more people will begin to awaken and begin to do a little bit of homework. And like you said at the very beginning of the recording when we got started, man, was that study is hard. Study is hard, especially if you go back into a historical context. It's easy to go out there and say, put Jesus in your heart. Here's your golden ticket. Read the book of John. Show up. Give. Do a little volunteering. You're good to go. That's what the church calls a disciple of Jesus.
I mean, I don't think we really get to the crux, or we really think about how deep and how serious some of the words of Jesus and the apostles are. I mean, Jesus said, if they hated me, I mean, what do you think they would do to my followers? Or he said things like, pick up your cross and follow me. It doesn't mean that you're going to live such a life that you won't have any problems, that you won't have any persecution. I mean, religious persecution, that you won't have any type of religious battles. I mean, most of the battles will be there. I mean, the majority of the battles will be there. And it's not just to battle someone just to battle them. But I think this is the battle. And I think that Jesus could
Yeah.
perceive through his level of prophethood or whatever, he could perceive what was getting ready to happen in the future. And so a lot of his teachings are cautions, and his disciples' teachings are cautions to the future generations.
Yeah.
Of going astray from his actual teachings. On verse 18, I wanted to share some more words by Rabbi Soloveitchik.
Yes.
Where he says like this. He says, until heaven and earth pass away. He says, in Jeremiah 33:25, we read, thus said the Lord, just as I have established my covenant with day and night and the laws of heaven and earth. He says, we also find in the Talmud, in Avodah Zarah 3a, it says, this teaches us that the Holy One, blessed be he, made a condition with the works of creation and said, if Israel accepts the Torah, my Torah, well and good. And if not, I shall return you to emptiness and void. And then he comments on the yod, the smallest letters in the Bible, and in the law, in the Torah. He says, not one yod. Even if there is a yod or a stroke that seems superfluous to us, know that they were not written in vain. There's certainly a hidden meaning to them.
Yes.
He's giving it another. He's giving you another take, another look at those words of Jesus.
Yes.
And now we come to verse 19, which says, therefore the man who violates one of these small commandments and teaches the sons of men to do like him will be called small in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. What do you got on this, Mitch?
Well, the master told his disciples, man, that they are to be scrupulous in keeping the lesser commandments or mitzvahs and the greater commandments, both. Okay. The level of expectation was probably greater than just about any rabbi for him. And that's what people don't understand about Jesus, is his teachings had such a high expectation. And that expectation toward Torah,
he wasn't lowering the bar, not at all.
The Talmud compares one of the greatest commandments, honor your father and your mother, out of Exodus 20:12, with one of the least commandments, you shall not take your mother with the young, in Deuteronomy 22:6, and points out that the reward for both commandments is identical, that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days. Perhaps this is why rabbis say, be as scrupulous observing a small commandment as you are observing a great mitzvah, for you do not know what the reward of each is.
What's so amazing about that is that that's part of our other study in Pirkei Avos, right?
I was getting ready to throw, when you were talking about Musar earlier, for those of the people that are out there watching, when Ray was talking about Musar, that is ethics of the fathers, guys. And so go ahead, Ray. That
verse right there is from Pirkei Avos chapter 2, verse 1, which says, be as scrupulous with a light commandment, one of the smallest commandments, as with a weightier one of the greatest commandments. Yes. He says, for you do not know the rewards of the commandments.
Yes.
So take care with each of them. It doesn't matter. Don't neglect one because you think it's small, and don't just try to keep them all.
Yes.
Of course, if any of them, Jesus does teach this, and so do the rabbis. If commandments come to to a point where they seem to that you have to choose one over the other. Right. That is where you weigh them. And you say which is more a weightier matter, and you keep the weightier matter at that moment.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There are times for that. But what Jesus does teach, and the rabbis teach, is that don't neglect the small commandments, and don't neglect the great commandment. Keep it all. Okay?
You know what, Ray? Also, too, for people watching that are still in the Christian thought process, when we talk about the commandments, the first thing that will pop to their mind are the Levitical, the sacrifices and things like that. But we began to give some people some of the pictures, like through Perke Abo and Ethics of the Fathers, and even honoring your mother and your father. Okay, um,
It's pretty easy for me to go take an animal, which I couldn't do anyways because I'm not a Cohen, I'm not a priest. That this is a job for the priests.
right.
It's pretty easy for one to take an animal and do a sacrifice. Now, don't. It's a lot more difficult to keep heart issues of the heart, issues of the mind, right?
Good, yeah.
For example, Jesus teaches something like this. He says, you've heard it said, of course, it's a lot easier for me not to commit murder. I mean, that's a very harsh type of thing to do. And the common people who are in their right minds don't do that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But he says, he goes to the heart of the matter. He says, in order for someone to kill someone, to murder someone like that, he has to have a lot of hate in his heart.
That's right, man. That's right.
You have to have a lot of hate in your heart.
Yes.
And then if you allow that hate to give root and start springing forth, you can eventually commit murder very easily.
Yes.
These are the weighty matters of the law. These are the things that are very important for one to keep, and the things that one should fight with day and night to try to really correct those character traits within yourself, right?
Good.
This is what he teaches, because for the most part, the Jewish people really can't even keep the Levitical aspects of the Torah today because the temple is not standing.
It's gone. Yes. Yes. Yes.
The temple is not standing at the moment. They cannot reinstate those commandments that are pretty simple in the sense of like actually just doing them. You go out, you bring the animals, and you do what you got to do, right? Or you offer incense, you do what you got to do. There are ways to do that correctly, and the rabbis understand how to. But it's a lot more difficult. They'll tell you, to love God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul.
Yes, yes, yes. Every day.
Every single day, every moment.
Not just on Sunday for 45 minutes, but every day, man. When I pull up to that domestic violence scene, bro.
Yeah, man.
It's just they don't understand. I mean, it's a concept that just you can't shove it into a box until Sunday and then feel good about it then. But you got to do it in those times, man, when the outside forces are just ridiculous. Go ahead, Ray. Take us on into 20, man.
He says, whoever does, Rabbi Soloveitchik continues, is whoever does, this means it is not enough that he does them. And since performance of the commands is the main principle, he must teach others that they too will know that it is the main principle. Then he will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, we're going to finish with verse 20, which is important so that we could see that Jesus never once tried to lower the bar from what was the norm at that time with the Pharisees and the scribes, etc., the Torah scholars. His was not about lowering the bar. His was about doing all, like the slogan of the army, be all you can be, right?
Yeah, yes.
Type of stuff. This is what Jesus was about.
Yeah.
He didn't want to bring mediocrity to God's kingdom, or he didn't want mediocre type of servants. He wanted cream of the crop. You had to be a real soldier in the will of God, right? In the kingdom of God. So he says, for I tell you, Jesus is saying, if your righteousness is not greater than the righteousness of the scholars and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoa, buddy. Whoa.
Yeah.
Hey, talk about being legalistic, dude.
That's yep.
So we have to first talk about something. The scholars, okay, so the scribes are the scholars, and the Pharisees were scholars. By definition, Pharisees were those who were separated away for purity, for righteousness' sake. These were the teachers of the community. Mm-hmm. So they were the highest in piety. There's no way that you can be pious, Perky Abos teaches this, if you are not learned in Torah. So you had to be learned in the will of God in Torah, right? in order to be a doer of God's will. And so he says to his disciples that your righteousness must exceed that of those scribes and the Pharisees. Okay? I know many people will come and say now and be like, well, Jesus had a lot to say about the Pharisees, etc. We have to remember, folks, that there were schools and schools and schools of Pharisees.
Right.
There was many Pharisees.
Right.
Jesus had a bone to pick with certain individuals. We're not talking about all, because it's clear if you read the New Testament, if you read the Gospels, that Jesus had many friends and followers who were Pharisees themselves. Nicodemus was a Pharisee.
Yes.
It's so crazy that one of the people that bury him, give him his own burial place, Joseph of Arimathea, was one of the great scholars of Pharisee of the school of the Pharisees.
Yes.
Okay. Furthermore, it says in Acts, etc., that there were many Pharisees that followed him.
Yes. Yes.
So we cannot. This is one of the most horrible things that you can do, is lump of a whole group of people or a whole school of people together. You cannot do that.
Thank you. Yes.
Many folks make that. It's a horrible thing to do, to be so prejudiced and stereotype an entire people group. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
And so he says here, if your righteousness is not greater, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he says this, he talks about this, if your righteousness is not greater, the truth is that performing the commandments is the main principle of the Torah. But if you perform them and do not adhere to the good attributes, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, as we find in the Talmud in Shabbat 31, A and B, which says, everyone who follows the Torah, but does not have fear of heaven, he is like a treasurer entrusted with inner keys, but not the outer keys. How will he enter? The Torah is likened to the inner keys. For Torah and performing the commandments is the main key. However, in order to come to the goal of the Torah and the commandments, good attributes are required.
Amen.
Good character traits, okay? He says, continuing with what the Talmud says in Shabbat 31b, it says, woe to him who has no courtyard, but makes a gate in order to enter it. Meaning, in other words, woe to the man who has no fear of heaven and yet still engages in Torah. He must first prepare a place in which the Torah can be upheld. That is, he must first purify his heart through the fear of God and good attributes. Then the Torah and the good attributes will come together, qualify him to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Wow. Ray, does that not equate to, when we talk about the ethics that are involved in commands a lot of times that Jesus brings to the surface, does that not follow back under the example we talk about, building a fence around the command, where the command, like you said, may be very simple, not to murder, but then Jesus takes it to he takes it to an ethical piece of how you feel toward that person. You know what I'm saying? And so he's building that fence so that command doesn't get broken. And we have examples of that, of course, of commands throughout Scripture. But specifically with Jesus, he's hitting hard on the ethical pieces that we talk about when it comes to certain commands that he addresses, right? Am I on the right path with that thinking?
Yes, for sure. The rabbis were they were privy to do this all the time. I mean, it was just part of the way that they taught, especially in the format of Musar ethics in general. When they were teaching ethics, they tried to help their disciples not to come nowhere near in transgressing one of the laws. And so they would do this. They would add further stringencies, these fences, in order to protect one from ever coming close to transgressing one of the commandments.
Yes.
Because they had these built around fences and stringencies around it in order that you wouldn't transgress the actual commandment. So yeah, of course, this is what the ethics was about. This is what Musar discipline was about.
Exactly. And there's a lot of great there's a lot of great substances when you get into Musar, and a lot of they're taught a lot of times to younger people that are growing up in families, in Jewish families and so forth like that. And for an old guy like me, learning new ethic, learning to reading through the ethics of the fathers, or understanding Musar, but it connects when you think about the teaching of Jesus, and you think about what he adds to the commands, and it just makes it even more solidified, man. So you did a great job, Ray.
Man, you did too, brother. This was good, man. I really appreciate this time, and I think that, I think we stuck to our verses, and we opened them up as much as we could with understanding. And I mean, I just hope that it also does. I mean, it makes people search and do some research, and really helps them to think. And maybe, that will bring some more questioning, and some, bring us some questions and give us some more work to do, dude.
Yeah. Well, and like I said at the beginning, Ray, these 4 verses, man, were 4 verses that just really, in my earlier understanding of trying to understand Scripture and try to understand Jesus, these were 4 verses that really, what do I do with them?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I do with them if I'm not in the Pauline letters, or what do I do with them if I'm not, going down the Roman road of salvation? What do I do with these things, man? So you did a great job, buddy. I appreciate you, man. I know it's been a long week for you. I'll be praying for you, like as always.
Likewise.
And for those of you out there, like I always say, if you keep the questions coming, do your homework, man. Ray and I, this is not something that we just picked up over the week. Ray's been at this for a long, long time. And this is the way Scripture was meant to be. It wasn't meant to be read through in a year. I mean, that's like opening a fire hydrant and just, you only get a drop or two here or there. Scriptures are meant to be wrestled with. And you got to have somebody to wrestle with. A wrestling match doesn't occur by yourself. And a lot of times when we sit in front of a speaker, or we sit in front of a teacher or whatever, we take that in and it gets put away on a piece of paper, and it gets stuck into the Bible, and then it's never really dealt with. But our challenge has always been to you to do your homework. Go out there and really dig in and dig deep and understand these words, and understand the historic Jesus, and see what he's got going on in his very own words. So I'm going to close this thing down because I'm getting hungry. And I want to say something too to y'all watching out there. Every now and then you'll see a shadow go behind me back here. I don't live in a haunted house, man. This is my wife, and she goes back and forth back here, and sometimes it looks like she's levitating, because she does have that special power. But she does a great job of keeping. I got 3 German Shepherds, and she keeps it kind of at bay while we do this. So one day I'm going to introduce her to you guys. We'll get her down on the ground, and we'll get her up here to the camera and let her say hi. Ray, I love you, brother. Hang in there,
Love you too, man.
And God bless all of the rest of you out there. Hope you have a safe and healthy week this week, and we will see you on the next teaching. Take care.
All right.